Please go ahead.
So I said you were one of our mentors as our company was a fledgling startup. So it's a privilege to share screen space with you.
Thank you, Vinod. Yeah, so I should tell you that behind the scenes, we are already doing a pivot. So we found out this morning that we were, having some difficulty with Vinod's camera. So if you think that Vinod is actually, on a regular go-to webinar, this thing video, he's not. He's actually using Zoom video, and he's sharing his screen, and therefore he's able to now be seen by all of you. So if you talk about pivot, here it is, right there in front of you. So again, I will also want to point out, as I've done in various other sessions that I've done, is that an entrepreneur is a person who obviously has a successful startup, but at the same time, also an entrepreneur is somebody who goes beyond the startup that he's working on, and the startup that other people are working on is actually as important to him, because it not only gives him an opportunity to do more, but also learn more and grow faster. So Vinod is somebody that came into our Microsoft cohort in the very beginning. He was very active, very engaged with fellow entrepreneurs, was always there to help them. Although he himself had a fairly large responsibility of building his startup to the next level. But over and beyond that, when we finished this whole cohort, and we were deciding to pivot ourselves at Microsoft and say, why not do our demo day in Delhi? Although we were running the entire cohort in Bangalore, I decided, hey, why not Delhi? Because it's another place, another audience, and also Microsoft had various senior folks that I wanted them to get excited about startups. So we decided to do that. So Vinod actually said, you know what, I need a couple of days off. As much as I am, happy to come to Delhi and so on and so forth, but I need a couple of days off to do what I need to take care of, and then I will join you there, and I will do, the demo day with everyone else. And I asked him why is it that he was kind of going away for a couple of days, and he said he was actually going to go to Chennai, which is where he's originally from, and there was huge floods in Chennai at that time. And this is 2015 I'm talking about. Huge concerns where people were being stranded. They were moving from ground floor to first floor to second floor, and yet the water was coming in, and lots of people without food and so on and so forth. So Vinod actually took the time off entirely to go and do a lot of rescue effort before he came back in and did the demo day. So I think it's not only him as an successful entrepreneur, but I also feel he's been a successful human being in really being a role model for all of us in making that happen. So again, once again, a very warm welcome,
Thank you. It's amazing you remember that story. When you reminded me of it, that's when I realized, wow, seems like a lifetime ago, and so much has changed. But I'm really happy to be here to share, because as Ravi pointed out, we realized for some reason my camera wasn't working only on GoToMeeting. So we had to open up another video conferencing app and share that screen, which told us that you never need to stop pivoting, I suppose. So happy to share and happy to learn as we go along, Ravi.
Great. So Vinod, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly walk people through, because we have people from various countries, different regions joining us. So we are live on Facebook, Twitter as well. So lots of things going on. So I'll just take a few minutes to introduce T-Hub, because everybody has a different perception of T-Hub. Like blind men describing the elephant by what they can touch and understand. So I just want to give a little bit of a comprehensive view, and then I will come back to you and get you started. Yeah. So Sandhya, if you can just share the screen. So T-Hub has been doing these webinars where we feel that we need to use the digital mechanism to reach out to all those startups, all those entrepreneurs who are on their journey, having huge existential crises, maybe having major doubts in their mind as to how to deal with the situation, and at the same time take advantage of the situation to go much more than what they have done in the past. So T Hub, as much as it is a building, a very nice looking building in Hyderabad, we also have the responsibility of building an innovation ecosystem along with our corporate partners, investors, academia, government, and of course, the all that good work that we do with the corporates, investors, academia, and government by enabling them and empowering them, also then brings a huge amount of um, benefits to the startups. So they are our focal point for sure, but by doing so much more around them, we are able to bring startups to a completely different level. So what do we do? So we have a three-pronged strategy. The first prong is about startups. So we have an entire full stack, if you can imagine, from incubation to acceleration to scaling, the entire gamut of programs, so that startups can really, grow throughout their entire journey with T Hub being there and playing their part. But also there is a cutoff point. We like to start with startups that are at 50 lakhs and above. So that is kind of the threshold after which we will be having various different families of programs for helping these startups. So while startups are actually the supply of innovation into the ecosystem, we also feel that if there isn't enough demand for these startups will ultimately want to go someplace else where the demand is. So if you see Vinod's journey, and Cloud Cherry's journey, you will see that it is something that he followed with the market and to be where he is relevant. So we are trying to generate more and more of this as part of the whole $5 trillion aspiration that we have as a country to also be in a place where startups can sell to, and that's where the corporate innovation comes in. And again, there we have a family of programs starting from emerging, coordinated, transformative, and disruptive, where we are actually engaging those corporates to actually come and collaborate with these startups, work with them, invest in them, acquire them, whatever it is. But all of that happening here in India, and that's what we do a lot of that kind of work. In fact, I am very involved in that part because I feel if the demand is there, startups will come, investors will come, everything will happen. The demand for the innovation has to be there, and that's what we spend a disproportionate amount of time on. And the third thing that we do is what we call as ecosystem innovation, and that's where we are taking the responsibility not of a single startup or a bunch of corporates or governments and so on and so forth. We are taking the responsibility of building the entire ecosystem. So the reason we are able to say that we are not working with early stage startups is because through ecosystem innovation, we help other incubators, be it in academic institutions or elsewhere, to actually build out their capabilities and capacity just like ours, so that they can offer the same set of services to the startups. So we do a lot of that kind of capacity building work in this thing called ecosystem office. We also work with mentors, orient them, train them, angel investors into the ecosystem, and so on and so forth. We do a lot of international programs where we are taking people from India, the best of the startups from India, to go to global markets, and vice versa as well. So these are all the things that we do: startup innovation, corporate innovation, and ecosystem innovation. Right. Um, I also wanted to just walk you through that fact that we have been doing this webinars now for several months, and it's been fairly successful. During the webinars, we have some interactions, but a lot more interactions thereafter. So if you can just keep moving, Sandhya. Um, yeah, so the kind of webinars we do is handling the hard time, which a lot of which we did in March, April timeframe. Business unusual has been March, April, May. Plan B is where now we're beginning to talk a lot more about not just looking at how the new normal is going to look like, but it's actually creating the new normal yourself as startups. And of course, these AMAs through interactions with thought leaders from India, from across the world, and this is what we have been doing. So just flashing the the slides to you. Please keep going, Sandhya. So these are some speakers that we've had, and so today's one is about pivoting. I think all of you pivot all the time, and Cloud Cherry was one of those companies that did very well even before coming into the at Microsoft, IDG and various other very successful VCs had actually found them. They were very interested in working with them, but they also came to us and said, they're on to something, phenomenal. We want to see how we can actually open up the opportunities for them in a much larger way, and that's where Microsoft came into the picture, and we, started the journey together with Vinod. So maybe Vinod, if you can take a minute or two just to introduce Cloud Cherry, the concept as you had initially conceived it, and how you actually thought about expanding into the global markets, moving this whole thing to the US. Was that because of just a scaling of the strategy, or was it a pivot of some kind that took you there?
Yeah, so I think in our perspective, when we looked at our business, we actually started with a strong SMB focus, and we wanted to build a global sort of an SMB sales and marketing machine out of India. But very quickly, we realized that our value actually lies in mid-market and larger enterprises. And as we discovered that, we also discovered that the ideal customers actually reside in the US. So not only did we have to change the target segment we went after, because moving from SMB to mid-market and enterprise is not just a case of changing the first page of your document. It means changing your demand gen techniques, changing the kind of salespeople you have, the kind of customer success model you have, even what you focus on the product changes when you go from a self-serve SMB audience to a mid-market enterprise kind of an audience. So we changed that, and then obviously I moved to the US because if we had to do enterprise deals, partner with our partners like at that point in time, Salesforce and Microsoft and Cisco, it only seemed right that I was closer to them, closer to the market which drives 60% of all software sales on the planet. So we moved the segment we were serving, and obviously moved the focus market, and I moved home, so to speak, to be closer to the market I wanted to kind of own.
And the interesting thing, after you landed in Silicon Valley, and the next time I met you after that, you said you have also have a an office in Salt Lake City, and you blew our mind one more time, saying, "What's going on? You're in the Valley, you're in the US. Where else do you want to be? If you're in the US and serving that market, and you also had a presence in a very remote part of." US, and that was part of the strategy as well. So what was your thinking there?
So when I went to the Bay, we all know the Bay is expensive. I had no idea how expensive it really was. So as I did the math, the joke in the company was that there's room for only one overpaid employee in the company. That's me. So we obviously couldn't afford to build a team in the Bay, and then we looked at what is it that we wanted to build in the Bay. Now we had phenomenal engineers. I was not looking for engineering talent, right, which is incredible in the Bay. I was looking to build out a marketing and an inside sales team, and obviously customer success to fulfill the demand for in-market. And the interesting thing we discovered around Salt Lake City was that Salt Lake actually is the inside sales capital of America. So InsideSales.com is in Utah, and the sheer number of large companies that have now started to set up the inside sales unit there is you can't even count it on if you want it. So we looked at a place which had a few attributes. One, had proven inside sales expertise. Second, at a very significantly lower cost base. Third, it was on mountain time, which was convenient to work both coasts. Because if you're on the West Coast, you're 3 hours from the East Coast, right? So your timings become a bit of a problem. And fourth, if you look at the demography of Salt Lake City, those are people who love Salt Lake, and they're not in any hurry to leave Salt Lake City. So if you go to a small town, you'll have a fairly passing crowd because they might want to move to the big city. In Salt Lake, people are really comfortable with their lives, and they like the sense of community that Salt Lake offers. So you also have a place where strong on culture, low on attrition. So it was sort of the perfect storm, and obviously didn't have any of the issues that the Bay Area did, and it was a no-brainer. I think I flew in to see an office, interview three people, hired two, picked an office, and a week later we were in action in Salt Lake City. That's how fast it moved.
Wow, it's fantastic. Yeah, so as you can see, it not only requires, an entrepreneur to be thinking on their feet, but also executing very, very quickly to make that happen and a reality. And of course, if it doesn't work out, to withdraw quickly as well. I think that's a very important element of an entrepreneur to be doing this very, very quickly. And at the same time, I think now it has become a requirement as we wade through, these pandemic challenges, to be doing this in a much, much more thoughtful way, much quicker way as we go along. So I will not take too much time. So this gives you a flavor for who Vinod is and the startup that he did, and the reason why it got acquired by Cisco. We'll get into that a little bit afterwards. But let me just turn it over to Vinod, and he has a presentation that he will walk you through. It gives you a sense of the thought process behind the pivots, and he'll give you a couple of examples as well. So over to you, Vinod.
Awesome, thank you. Sandhya, could you please share the deck? Awesome. So what I've done, to be honest, I must count myself extremely fortunate to have sold my startup before COVID, because COVID changed everything, right? So many of you who are founders today, who are running companies, are faced with tough challenges, right? This is unexpected and unprecedented. So if it's unexpected, it's fine. If it's also unprecedented, then it's very hard to work around it. So as I looked at the pivots I made, some in wartime, some in peacetime, and as I looked at all my friends who run phenomenal startups around me, in conversing with them and seeing my customers pivot, I tried to crystallize my thoughts on what does it take to pivot right when Ravi asked me to talk. And I realized in interviewing my friends in startups that I've invested in and consulting, founders that I aspire to be like, then when I look at my customers, and then I draw on my own history, I tried to consolidate that in a bit of a framework, that's what I want to share here. So if you go to the next slide, let's talk about what we're talking about when we talk about pivoting. Sandhya, can you go to the next slide, please? Awesome. So what are the elements of a pivot? Now, basically, what you're trying to understand is what is changing. And it might seem like a simple question, but what is changing? If you misdiagnose, you probably set yourself up for failure. And as we talk about it a little further, you'll realize what I'm saying. So the point is, you have to understand what is changing. We will talk a little deeper about that. The next is, how is that change impacting me? When I say me, I mean my startup. The third, obviously, how long is it going to last? Right? Is it temporary? Is it long enough that it doesn't matter that it's temporary, or is it permanent? Is the world permanently changing? Very important, right? To know what the problem is. The fourth, obviously, is now how do I move up the value chain? Because if things have changed, I've probably slipped in the value chain. If you're very lucky, for a few companies, you actually end up moving up the value chain, in which case you just continue to do what you're doing. But most of us aren't that lucky. So let's assume you've moved down. The point is, how do I move up the value chain? But you'll realize that in times of strife, you can actually do things that are always needed to do, which means when you start cutting costs, for example, right, the first thing anyone thinks of in a pivot, you'll realize that many of those costs were things you could have always lived without, right? So but the final thing is, once you know what's changing, how does it impact you, how long it lasts, and how do you respond to that? The point is, how do you execute these changes? They always say that the greatest ideas that could have changed the world happened in the shower, and then by the time you came out, you forgot and you moved on with your life, and they never came to life. So it's really important to execute, because execution is almost 90% of the game. The idea can be half as good as a better one, but if you execute it well, it's probably the only idea that matters. So let's dive a little deep. I'm going a little fast because I want to give enough time for us to talk in the end and answer your questions. Let's move on. What is changing? Now, this is very important, guys. If you don't get the first step right, as I said, everything is wrong. The point is your customers' willingness to pay changing, or is it their ability? Huge difference, okay? Willingness means the moment I tell you, let's say, for example, that, hey, a lot of layoffs are possible, okay? If I go through, let's say you're working in a large company, and I tell you, hey, it looks like lots of these companies are going to start laying off people, okay? Your ability to pay is not gone, because you still have your job. But what you're going to start doing is you're going to go back to your family and say, you know what, let's stop these extra expenses. You never know where the world is headed, correct? So you start curbing the clamping down on discretionary expenses. And that is a case of your willingness to pay changing, but your ability not having changed. You're not out of a job. Your income hasn't reduced. Your income hasn't stopped, but you've actually stopped paying for something because you're not willing to incur that extra expense. Okay? So that's the difference between willingness and ability. Ability to pay could be about their business going under, which is a huge problem. Ability to pay could be around, or willingness could be around whether your project is important enough, right? So, for example, let's say you supplied something that helped in-store experiences get better. If the stores are going to be shut for the next 6 months, that's probably not an area of investment for these companies, right? So there you go. So if your base premise is gone, maybe the willingness to pay for your technology is gone, even though the ability remains, right? The third, when you look at willingness and ability and you look at that, what you're really trying to see is how have my customers' needs changed, right? If they don't want my product or they don't want it in the shape and form that I'm giving, how has their base change evolved? Because I need to basically find a way to meet some evolved need, right? And the fourth thing really is my customer's business model itself. So, for example, someone who had, let's say, hundreds of points of presence will suddenly look at this and say, you know what, post-COVID, what I'm going to do is shut down half of these and move a lot of these transactions online, because turns out that my customers are able to do half these things online that they could do on store. So if the customer's business model is moving from, let's say, complete on-prem focused with 10% online to, let's say, 50-50 or 60-40 or whatever, right? Then you need to know that some of these changes are going to go on in perpetuity, which means as their model changes, their ability and propensity to pay will change, their needs and requirements will change, and hence where you fit in their value chain also will change. So you have to understand, is it a willingness of the customer to pay that's changed, okay, which means you need to change your value proposition, or the ability, which means you might need to change the way you bill or give them deferment and things like that. If their needs change, you probably need to think about product. And if the business model is changed, you need to look at your entire product market fit again, right? So you need to know where in the spectrum you fit. So if you go next and you understand what is fundamentally changing, your question is, how does this impact me? So is it impacting my ideal customer profile? Wherein if I sold to chief, let's say, marketing officers who are looking at customer growth, suddenly turns out your chief customer officer is your new buyer, simply because blind customer acquisition is no longer a focus for the company. Retention of the existing customers is a focus for the company. So maybe your ideal customer profile is changing. Maybe your buyer persona is changing, right? Maybe within the same buyer persona, the needs are changing, right? Which means your USP changes. If yesterday you said, hey, I can do this for any customer who walks in the store, I can XYZ. Let's say that was your value prop. If nobody is walking into the store, take a wild guess what's happening to your USP. It doesn't matter, right? So you have to understand, is it your buyer persona itself that is changing? It may or may not, but you must also understand, even if your persona hasn't changed, is your unique selling proposition to that person changing? His or her priorities may have shifted, which means you probably need to move up. When I share with you the experience from a client of mine that I'm going to show as a use case, you'll realize that the USP had to change, even though the buyer was the same, and it made a massive difference to the business. We'll come to that. The other thing is your customer's journey changing, and I'll tell you what that means. So I'm not much of a TV viewer, so I didn't have a TV in the bedroom. And as COVID stuck, you realize, man, you can't go out. Maybe you need a TV in the bedroom. So what do? You go to Amazon. You go to Amazon because you identify that as the best way to get to anything delivered home. And now it was back-ended by a week or 10 days because everyone else was ordering stuff. TVs weren't top priority, and in any case, it's not that it can be done same day. So you suddenly go in and say, hold on. So what do I do? So we go to the Best Buy website. Turns out Best Buy is closed, but they're offering curbside pickup. So you can, on the mobile app, order a TV. In 60 minutes, they tell you the TV is ready, packed, and whatever. You can drive up a lane that they created, which was curbside pickup. All you need to do is through the car, just through the mirror, whatever window, sorry, you show your ID, they scan it, and you open up the boot, they put the TV in, game over, right? So when your customer's journey and experience and interaction touch points with the brand changes, remember that what value they want to offer to their customers is also changing. So wherever on the value chain you reside, if the journey has changed, you probably need to change what value you offer there too. Again, to go back to that example of offering some value to in-store customers, if nobody's going inside the store, you probably need to figure out what you can do to that customer who comes curbside, right? Because that's where the customer journey is shifted. But if you really look at that, the answer to more of these questions is yes than no, which means looks like my customer profile shifted, my value to them has changed, my customer's journey looks all changed, the budgets available to me have changed, right? That means you need to revisit your product market fit, which means everything you know about your market has changed. The applicability of your product to that market hence has changed, which means you may well be in steady state feeling really good about life, but you really need to go back and revisit your product market fit. You may almost be restarting your startup, right? So you have to look at what the impact is. Once you've diagnosed what the problem is, then you have to look at what your impact is. Then you can start looking at how to redress it, right? So if you go to the next slide, Sandhya, what do we do next, right? Once you know this, you want to know, are these impacts temporary or permanent? In the case of curbside pickup, it is fathomable that stores will open up, right? But if I were running that store, I'd be like, wow, this is a really good one. For the first time ever, I can actually beat an online retailer because no online retailer can do same day delivery, right? Now, this is not delivery, it's pickup, fine. But if you're in close proximity, you can actually say, look, order within the hour, you can come and pick up, let's say, a TV. And that's actually phenomenal. So if they believe that this change is permanent, right, you need to probably cater to this use case for longer than COVID might last. So the point is, are the changes temporary? If so, how long? If the change is going to be around for 6, 9, 12, 18 months, it's as good as permanent, right? So you need to look at the world. And anything someone does for that long will get into some state of semi-permanence. So for example, in the contact center business, the business side of which I run for Cisco, we found a lot of our customers sent tens of thousands of the agents back home, right? Away from those busy call centers, they send them back home. Some of them have come out and said, you know what? Maybe only half of my agents will come back to the call center flow. Some of them have said we intend for none of them to ever come back, right? So some of this might be impermanence, right? Now, if it is temporary or permanent, doesn't matter. The point is, how does it impact cash, staffing, and messaging? So when I say this, I've broken this into 3 different vectors, obviously, because if somebody just doesn't have the ability to pay, and all you've realized is that it's a cash flow issue, and you need to give them 3 months or 6 months or whatever, and nothing else has changed, right? In that case, you need to obviously plan cash, right? You're not going to make cash for the next X amount of time. How does it change staffing? So if you probably, for example, had frontline salespeople who, pounded the pavement, so to speak, whereas now everything is moved to inside sales mode. Do you need to staff different people or have them do different things? The store that's shut, those people have probably gone home. So what's happening is on big stores with, let's say, dozens of staff, they've gone home, the transactions have moved online, and the same people are knowledge workers who are now picking up phones like call center agents, and they're basically saying, okay, do you want to buy a TV? What TV do you want? Okay, let me help you with the options. What kind of house do you have? Oh, this option is good for you. You know what? This is a good TV for you. Awesome. If you want to put an order, please do it. You can pick it up curbside in 60 minutes, right? So they're changing the nature and of the staffing and the nature of their work, right? But very importantly, if all of that is changing, your messaging also needs to change, right? So you can't go with the same message pre-COVID and post-COVID because the customer is hearing a different tune. So you probably need to be talking a different language to them. But the most important part is if the changes are permanent or long enough that they reach that state of what I would call semi-permanence, then your entire PMF needs to be revised entirely. So this entire exercise, as you see, is to try to diagnose, triage, and isolate the issue and see if it is a temporary issue that only affects cash flow, then fine, I can do something temporary, right? But the point is you're trying to hope that it's not a permanent change, but you come to through a graduated process to a point wherein you probably recognize that it's a permanent change, and then you need to revisit your product market fit itself, right? So last is, if it's permanent, it's probably a product market fit change that you need to look at. Go to the next slide. I'll again run a little fast so I can wrap up in 5 to 10 minutes and we can do Q&A. How do I move up the value chain, right? The first really is separating signal from noise. Every single one of you who have customers have probably heard, hey, look, I'm too busy, we can't talk about this payment right now, right? So what does that mean? You take it at face value. Is the customer so busy that they can't take 60 seconds to talk to you about the payment? The answer is no. What it means is they don't have time for what you have to say, because what you have to offer is so far down the value chain that they truly don't have the time for that, right? So when they say they don't have time, what they mean is they don't have time for you, and you need to understand how to get to a point wherein you are relevant to them. When I share with you the user story, in the end, you'll realize it started with, I don't have time for you, to, this is awesome, thank you for adding value. We'll talk about that a little later. The second thing for me is leading and lagging indicators. Revenue is almost always a lagging indicator. When a customer comes in and says, I can't pay you anymore, that's actually a lagging indicator. Something happened, let's call it COVID, right? It resulted in something, let's say people don't come into stores anymore, which caused for your product, which was for in-store shoppers, whatever the product is, to become semi-redundant, and hence they want to stop paying you, right? So if you only take the fact that they want to stop paying you and say, you know what, I'll give you 3 months, I'll give you 6 months, without assessing whether they will ever go back to the same store footprint, whether they will even open stores again, right? Or if there are adjacent points of value like curbside pickup that I could actually try to offer, then all you're doing is taking their words on face value and waiting for the next 6 months, hoping they will come back and say, here's your money from the last 6 months, and let me start paying you like normal again. The world is probably not going to be that generous to you, right? Hence, you have to separate leading and lagging indicators. And obviously, a huge extension of that is learning the right lessons from data. Anyone can put a set of data together and make any, you can use confirmation bias to make any decision you want. To go back to the last experience, if your collections team comes and says, 80% of customers told me, I can't pay you, 90% of them told you, I can't pay you because I have no time, you can take the data and say, our biggest problem is customers don't have time. So you can even give them a wristwatch if you want it, but that won't solve the problem. The point is they don't, if I showed you the whole chain, right? They don't have time for you because what you do has moved down the value chain, and hence you need to do different things than just look at blind data and do what you need to do. Sorry, we need to go to the next slide. I think we just skip for a second. So can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. That is where, so the last line which on that page was what adjacencies will drive value. And I wanted to hold the thought around adjacencies driving value because I'm going to talk about that when I look at the user story. So what is a pivot, right? Having gone through this assessment sort of matrix one by one and graduating up, the pivot is you need to evolve one or all of the below. First is value proposition, right? So do I need to change, tweak, sharpen my value proposition? That's actually the simplest thing to do, right? Second and harder one is your target market itself. Like you don't need, X person doesn't need you, but Y person can, you know, a lot of alcohol companies started making hand sanitizers, right? That's a case of, it's not value proposition that changed, right? The taste of your beverage didn't change. The nature of your product changed, which means you're not supplying to people on a Saturday night, you're actually supplying to somebody who needs it for a totally different purpose. So if a target market changes, it's a much larger change for your business, right? The pivot could also be a revenue model. So for example, you said, hey, I will charge per shopper who walked into your store. Nobody's walking into the store, you probably need to change that. If your value was on, I'll help you make $5 every shopper that walks into the store, hence pay me 50 cents per walk-in. If that has changed, obviously your billing model has to be changed, right? So the last really is operating model, which means how you operate, how you deliver your services, how you service it, right? If all of that changes, then you're really looking at a fundamental overall of how you run as a company itself, right? So the point here I'm trying to make is that you need to understand what you're pivoting. Otherwise, you'll go back to the simple example wherein you go and tell your board, hey, all my customers are too busy because they're grappling with COVID, fair. They can't pay me for the next 3 to 6 months because you know how the economy is, right? I'm sure when the economy bounces back, my business will come back to normal. Guess what will happen in 6 months' time? When the world comes back to normal, you haven't explored adjacencies, you've not moved up the value chain, all you've done is revenue deferment, which added zero value to that customer, right? Because they weren't going to pay you in any case. And at the other side of this whole lockdown, you realize that you've not added any incremental value for them. And in the way the world looks to them on the other side, you are actually not valuable, right? So that is why it's very important to know what you're pivoting and execute. Now, how do you pivot? If you go to the next slide, the point is how do you really execute that pivot? And again, I'll go very quickly through this slide. Sandhya, can you move to the next slide, please? Awesome. First, please go back to the previous slide. know what kind of a pivot you're making. If you don't know what kind of pivot you're making, you're probably doing discounting for someone who wants a discount, allowing someone to terminate if they want to terminate, and you're just responding to what's coming without diagnosing, right? Understand what the leading indicators are, right? And agree upon the lagging ones. So don't just look at revenue or willingness to pay and just make your decisions based on that. Execute with speed. I think Ravi said this. It is almost, it's not absolute, it is almost better to make a wrong decision fast, right, than waiting far too long to make what might or might not be the right decision. The point is there's so much instinct involved here that you don't know what the decision is till it plays out, right? I'm not saying make a different decision a day. Put your time and thought and do the analysis, but please execute with speed and do A/B testing. So I'm not saying if something changes, just change your business overnight. Have a control set, experiment with some customers, get a real-time feedback loop going, and see if the changes work and start expanding. Once you know something works, triple down on it, right? And fourth, last really for me is have a beginner's mind. Assume that you know nothing, right? Don't ever be in a situation wherein everything is new, everything is extraordinary, and then you try to use conventional wisdom on top of it, right? When you're on the first principles part, don't juxtapose conventional wisdom and anecdotal evidence on top of first principles, because then you're trying to do something new, but with the same old learning from the past. And the reason you're in this trouble is because the world is not what it used to be. So don't use that, okay? So let's go to the next slide, and I'll stop because we'd love to start chatting. Is very quickly jump into an example. Sandhya, can you move forward, please? So this is a customer I hold in very high esteem. One of our clients, and Chelsea is the chief revenue, chief customer officer. She's the top exec at the company, and they executed a pivot that absolutely blew my mind. And I had a ringside view into them executing this pivot, and you'll all recognize this. So here's the story. What does Snack Nation do? Snack Nation offers companies of all sizes a perk of workplace snacks. You'd be amazed how large a thing it is. In India, it's a smaller thing because you can always have someone give samosas in office every day. But a variety of snacks at multiple office locations on demand on a subscription basis is the business. But in the back end, it also has a lot of analytics that FMCG companies use in terms of what consumers consume, what snacks. So it's a two-way demand supply kind of a play with lots of analytics in the back end. But at the heart of it, it's a subscription product. Okay, you can replace office snacks with anything, but think of it as a subscription product, right? It's a fairly large company. Let's assume 30 to 50 million of ARR. So it's a fairly scaled company. Now here's the problem: COVID hits. Now I told you the store story, right? So if you supply snacks to the office and all offices shut down, what happens to your business? You don't have a business anymore, right? Because the fundamental premise of your business is gone. So when they had 80% subscription pauses from members, which is enough to kill any business, right? Even those under contract said, I'm not going to take my shipment, or in some cases, I've taken the shipment, I can't pay you, do what you want, right? And employees obviously get scared. If you're the employee of a company wherein 80% of your customers are just putting their hands up and saying, I can't pay you, for good reason too, right? Not being difficult, you probably think your company is going to the dogs, right? So it's bad for employee morale, bad for your customers, it's terrible for the company, right? So what did they do? So let's move forward and see how they thought through a pivot. And there is a point I have not made in the past that I want to show you here. So customers are the heart of that pivot, right? So if you click once, you'll see what is the problem statement. The problem statements are basically threefold. So you can click a couple more times. So first was they said, okay, let's put the customer's hat on. Let's forget what our problem is. Our problem is 80% of our customers are refusing our subscriptions. That's not the customer's problem. The customer's problem is, what is their problem right now that we can solve? If their problem, for example, is that my bank is not giving me an overdraft, now your subscription service isn't going to solve that problem. So let's narrow those problems down to what we can solve, and also let's solve problems that they will pay for, right? I love the simplicity of this. What are my customer challenges? Out of that, what are the customer challenges that I can solve? And out of those, what are the customer challenges that they're willing to pay for, right? Beautiful, simple matrix. And if you did nothing, I would just ask you to do this three-step process. So you go to the next slide, okay? And what you see is how they did it. So first thing is, okay, every single company in the world is looking at employee experience, right? They're looking at, okay, my employees have gone home. What am I going to do? I used to do so much for them in the office, but now they're gone and I have no idea what to do to take care of them. And they're on WebEx for like 12 hours a day. So the point was, how do I drive good employee culture while everyone is working remotely? Before you come to the pivot, if you click once more, you see, what are my internal strengths I can leverage? right? Remember, you can't be, for example, a sumo wrestler and because the world changed tomorrow morning become Usain Bolt, right? He can, but it will take time. So if you're looking at speed, the point is you got to look deep and say, what am I good at, right? Apart from obviously making a product. And they said they had lightning speed in go-to-market. They had a very flexible address collection technology. It actually helped because suddenly they said even established companies said, "Oh, I actually don't know what address my employees live in. It is in HRMS. It's not updated." Smaller companies didn't even have that record, but they were masters at warehousing and shipping because of working with so many FMCG companies and doing so much shipment. And they had a very high quality inventory. So what could they do with a high quality inventory wherein they knew warehousing, shipping really well, and speed was their friend? What they did with the pivot was they went back to these people and said, hey, if you go to the next click, please. If you are worried about how your employees feel at home, why don't you show them your love and ship personalized home-based snacks and beverage to keep them engaged and happy? Same business, different model, different delivery for a mildly different purpose, right? Instead of office just sending it home. What happened as a result? Now you might think this is simple. The number of companies that do these kind of changes is probably 1%. When they move from office subscription to shipping personalized stuff to people at home, the result, if you just click once more, the result will blow your mind. A company that was facing an 80% decline in subscription made up for all its subscription revenue, right? And gained 2,000 new customers. Mind you, this is all in the last quarter, right? So the speed of the pivot and the speed of the results absolutely blew my mind. I'm going to show you one more use case that they faced. Some customers didn't have this issue. If you go to the next slide, they're like, look, I have this food and beverage program. I don't know what to do with it. I don't want to ship stuff to my employees for whatever reason, right? I don't have time to deal with it. So I came back to, I don't have time for you. What this customer is going to do is stop paying you, right? And you'll say, okay, you know what? Pay me after 6 months. I'll pause shipment. And guess what? Nothing changes. Now they said, what can we do for this customer? So if you click once, the strengths that these people looked at, sometimes you just click once, yeah, they had something very interesting. So Chelsea and some of the leaders were actually involved in non-profits with local food banks. Their lightning speed was their strength, of course, and their flexible billing software. Now, what do you do with these attributes? Okay, so here's the pivot that they did, which is phenomenal. They did two things. The first thing that they did, if you go to the next click, please. First, they said, you know what? What if in times of COVID, in times of crisis, when your communities are struggling, we take your subscription and donate it to food banks instead, so it go to the most underprivileged sections of society, homeless people, people out of a job, right? People who don't have a meal, and no company could say no to that. This is phenomenal. You're giving us good karma. My money might not come from employee experience anymore. It may come from corporate social responsibility. So you can imagine the payer changed, but huge plus. But the second was to swap monthly spend for other products like wine or hand sanitizer. It's hardly a surprise that wine consumption has probably hit worldwide record highs thanks to COVID. But the point was to change the nature of their products and produce. But the first one is truly mind blowing for me. They invented an entirely new business model wherein I donate your snacks to a food bank. It does good to society, right? I'll reduce my margins for it if you want, right? But somebody else in the company is going to pay for it. So if you go to the next one more click, you realize what it did. What it did was it saved $1 million in revenue, right, within the first month, and donated $350,000 of snacks to food banks. So look at this. A company maintains its margin profile, right, helps its customers, which is large enterprise, continue to drive value, and delivers $350,000 worth of value to the local community. So I love this example of a pivot which is done with great speed. And with this, I will pause. Ravi, I know this was a speed run, but it is a pivoting is probably going to take you more time than a 30-minute webinar. So back to you, Ravi.
Yeah. So fantastic presentation, Vinod, and also the case study as definitely mind blowing. Given the ability for a company that we would not have associated with thinking this way, executing this way, and have demonstrable results to share with us. I think is absolutely phenomenal. So this is really good. I think one of the things that you will probably know by now, the audience, is the fact that it's no longer an option. Pivoting is a requirement. What you left back in February, March of this year, is not going to come back. You have to now be ready for something that will be very different in August, September, October, and your business model will have to change. Your technology has to change. Your customer sets may have to change. Your pricing may have to change. So it is, you have to do it. It's like that's why we were like not saying should you pivot, no, and that question has been answered already. You have to pivot, and you have to pivot right. So I won't take too much time. I wanted to share a few things with you, but what I will do is I will just talk to you about the fact that what we will do, given that we have such clear, crisp, concise set of recommendations that Vinod has made. Obviously, you have need to think this through and come up with what you want to do in your own startups. So what T Hub is going to do is we are going to do a much longer workshop, which I will run based on those same principles that Vinod talked about, but also try and get you to a place where you can now say, this is my new plan, right? And again, this is great for having a lot of great discussion. This is a possibility. This is a possibility. I can do that. That's all great. We will have those discussions too. But at some point in time, we want to leave you with something very specific and say, this is my plan going forward into September, and this is what I'm going to execute. What does it mean, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to have Sandhya share a screen, my presentation. Which demonstrates to you a very simple thing, which is on the financial side, right? So if you go to slide number 5, this is where we had taken a sample financials of where you are today or where you were in February, March, and then take those numbers. Can you just go directly to 5, please? And then based on certain pivots that you have already assumed will happen, uh, then come up with a very specific set of financials for how it is going to look in the future.
I think it's a different slide, Ravi. I'm not sure. That was 5. This looks like
Okay.
5. Maybe if you go to the...
No, no. So this is the new presentation that Sandhya, you and I talked about. Maybe it's not here. Okay. Anyway, so I think you can just take this thing off. I think we are pivoting as we go along. But anyways, the point is a very specific set of financials. So it is grounded in reality, grounded in data, and then we apply all the principles of pivoting, and then see what does it mean for you. Like what Vinod was doing was bottom lining it. Okay, you are saving $1 million in revenue. You are doing 350K in food bank, whatever. You have to be able to quantify what this pivot means to you, and that's what we're going to get to in the workshop. So it's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. We will get back to you on the dates and so on and so forth, but I just want to leave you with that. So what we'll do is we'll take the next few minutes just to get some questions from the audience. So can I just request Sandhya to see what questions we have? Maybe you can read them out to us so it's faster, so we can get through a few questions.
Yes, so we have quite a few questions here. One of the questions that so there are like a few basic questions that I think that are more focused on, should I consider myself pivoting, or when do I know that I'm ready to pivot? So can you bring clarity on these two? Like there are many questions just based on these two things, like when should I do it, how will I know that I know that I need to pivot right now, and so and one more question that is related to this is, will this be temporary and pertinent to only this crisis situation, or like or should I look at pivoting as a more future and a more permanent solution for this, or is it like limited to the crisis period?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll start, and maybe Ravi, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So first thing, it's a bit like this. If you're thinking whether you should pivot or not, you probably should. but I don't mean to tell you, hey, go pivot. Pivot seems like a cool word. It probably means nothing, right? So I would tell you that instead of making this a binary decision, whether I should pivot or not, whether I should do it now or not, please go through that framework, right? Ravi mentioned that, look, the world as we know it is, it's changed probably for good, right? So if you're at a point wherein for the last 3, 4 months, things are not going as per plan, you probably should take a very serious, good, hard look at your business. Please follow the framework. You don't have to be religious about the framework I showed, but think of it in the sequence that I told you, right? And then know what kind of a pivot you need to make, right? And please make it. It might well just be managing cash flows for the next 6 months. If you're really lucky, you're managing cash flow for the next 6 months. That's the luckiest person in the storm, right? Beyond that, every other option means you have to radically change many elements of what you do, your value proposition or your revenue model or your operating model. But the point is, don't just say, oh, I need to pivot, right? And then jump into some sort of a pivot without understanding what the pivot is. Hence, please follow the process, right? So that's my first thought. The second thing is, I think there was a question on when should I do it, how should I do it? We did talk heavily about speed, right? Once the reason I said, see, speed without clarity or direction is dangerous, right? So please take a moment to pause. It could be a couple of days. Sit with your key stakeholders, go through the process, assess all these parameters, and know what kind of a change you need to make, right? Otherwise, as I said, you'll end up managing cash flow, whereas what you should have been doing is thinking about what adjacency you need to drive up towards, right? So that's really my guidance on doing the pivot. There was a second part of the question that I probably am forgetting, Sandhya, or did I address that question?
The second part was like, is it going to be a permanent, pivot
Okay.
or is it temporary?
So my answer might not be encouraging, but the greatest founder skill is to know where the puck is headed. And unfortunately, there's no framework for that. So I'd be lying if I said, here's this 1, 2, 3 formula to where the world is going. But this is where we really have to rely deep into intuition, right? And you have to connect the dots forward looking. So I told you something around the contact center business itself, right? I said, look, many of our customers are starting to think, hold on, why do I need to have these investments in large contact centers? If I have 10,000 agents, maybe I need only 5,000 seats, right? And I can have more flexible work from home, which means any change that we are doing with technology, security, service, quality monitoring for a work from home audience is probably permanent, right? So you have to go, like, the answer is not a binary and probably doesn't reside with Ravi or me. You have to look at your business, look at, join the dots with regards to what's happening and what might likely still persist and stay post-COVID, right? And see if there is any reason, if that's a better operating environment than before, right? Then people are going to probably stay. The last example I'll give, and I'd love to hear Ravi, is look at this video conferencing itself, right? I flew 5 days a week, or at least travel 5 days a week, not always flying. But the point is, now if you go back to, let's say tomorrow morning, you said, snap, COVID's done. I'd love to travel, but I'm not going to travel 5 days a week. I'm not going to go to every single meeting, flying, taking 2 flights, 3 flights. So you can imagine my change is that instead of, let's say, 100 flights a year, I'll probably come to 50. Now, when a frequent flyer halves his flying, airlines need to reinvent their model. Airlines need to sit now and say, you know what? I don't think I'll ever go back, at least in the next 5, 7 years, to the flying volumes that I saw before, right? So I probably need to change. The person running the loyalty program is probably going to have to think, hold on, my loyalty tiers are probably going to break because what constitutes a frequent flyer may change. So everyone has to look at downstream impact of these changes, right? And you're the best judge of seeing whether it's permanent or not. Sorry, Ravi, back to you.
No, this is great. So yeah, I'll try to give it a little bit more definition and definitiveness, right? As in saying, the world is going to change. That's one thing, and you will have to pivot. I will be much more definitive about that. If you're not, then maybe you're just going to have a weaker version of your startup from the way you left it. You will not be taking advantage of new opportunities and really making yourself more successful, and maybe your investors more successful. The second thing is, that this game of entrepreneurship does not have a right or wrong answer. There is the fact that you are probably the closest that can be closest to the truth, closest to what is right, because you are there, you are talking to customers, you are building the technology, you are talking to your employees. Who better than you to actually decide what is right or what is wrong? right? And I know it just kind of puts a lot more pressure on you as entrepreneurs, but it also feels that, if you thought in in, let's say, in March, that, oh shit, man, this is hard. But I would want you to reflect back and say, how much more deeply you have reached inside to find the right answers for yourself. How much more deeply have you deconstructed your business model to really find those answers. How much more deeply you have been talking to your customers to actually understand what they are going through. It doesn't matter what you're going through, really. If they are going through something and you're able to connect with what they're going through and you're able to serve them and make them successful, then you will be successful. So your pivots do not depend on your intellectual um, discussions within your teams. It is actually by the data points that you're collecting constantly by talking to your customers, to your stakeholders. I think you have to do that. Even though you're working from home, you have to be in their world as much as anything else to really find out what is it that you need to be doing differently to make this happen. And again, it is a lot of great intellectual constructs, and I'm sure you've read it somewhere. You've watched several YouTube videos also saying the same thing. But I think you really need to apply this for yourself. And as you're going through that process, and we would love to help ask those difficult questions, get you grounded much more in the reality that's evolving around you to make those decisions as you go forward. So we'll talk about that during the workshop. So I think you need to take the onus yourself. There is no question that.
Okay. Moving on. So there is another question from Praveen. He's saying that the opportunity gap created by the ban of Chinese apps. So how can a startup right now looking to pivot over there? Is it going to be a temporary window, or is it going to be a permanent thing that someone can bank on right now? Like how to utilize this opportunity? That's the question.
Awesome. So let me take a stab at it. So in a free market, there is no bar to competition, right? So whether it was the Chinese app, whether it is an Indian competitor, or somebody from, I don't know, Poland, who makes an app to compete with you, you're never going to be fans competition, right? So what you're getting with the Chinese app ban is something very valuable. You're getting a proven asset class, right? People who want to make short videos, let's say, for example, to take one app, right, on any topic, to, I don't know, to share, to gain stardom, to do ludicrous stuff, whatever, right? Whatever the motivation is. And suddenly, with a proven product, proven market demand has been taken out, right? So it very rarely in life do you get an opportunity that good, right? But the point is, if you don't fundamentally feel for the problem, if, like, for example, if Ravi and I said, hey, this is a great opportunity, let's put 10 developers together, right, and let's make the new TikTok, we'd probably fail because neither of us feels for the problem, neither of us relates to the problem, right? I don't know about Ravi, but I don't. So maybe Ravi is like, no, hold on, I do. So the point is, great companies are not built just because one opportunistic moment came in front of you. You must genuinely care about the problem, because let's say today there's a vacuum, you create a one-to-one replacement for somebody, right? It's fine. 3 months later, let's say the ban gets lifted, or somebody from the US comes, or whatever, right? Or 10 other people in India create the same app. How will you stand out? How will you grow? How will you compete, right? You'll only do that when you build the best possible experience for your customers. And that doesn't come because somebody else told you it's a good time to build an app. So I would really look at, please use the opportunity, be very opportunistic, because founders use even a sliver of opportunity that by great luck of fortune comes to them, but know that there is no alternative to building a great company but to truly feel for the problem. So don't start feeling like, I've never used TikTok, for example. I don't think I could make an app to replace that because I know nothing about the demography, pain, the user experience, and you can't just apply a 4-step formula and recreate TikTok. So please make use of it, but make a great lasting product, right? As opposed to a knockoff that does something which is only good because there's no option available. I hope that helps.
So I'll just add to that. So I completely agree with Vinod. So let's kind of step back and see what is that. What is this mean? The Chinese apps being banned, right? This is one opportunity, and there are several such opportunities that are around you. Now, you may or may not know it. This is something that I know our journalists have actually captured. They put it in the papers. We've had several TV shows about discussing this. So it's really put in front of you so that you can see it, feel it, listen to it, and all that. But that's uh, that's something that's going to happen a lot, in the next few months as well. But what I would really want you to do is not just look at it for what it is being presented to you for. Look at it for what it is meaning for you as your business that you can do. And there are such opportunities that are not documented, that are not getting so much publicity, that is also emerging for you. And that is where you will actually grab those slivers of opportunity like Vinod talked about, and really build your next generation of your startup, because you have that technology understanding that you've already built some part of or some semblance of in the past. You have that understanding of the market like nobody else. So you are already 75%, 80% there. It's just a matter of the remaining 20% that you need to imagine. All the other guys who are just wanting to get into this business, they are far behind. So it's your opportunity to go grab market share, as we call it in our world, right? Go get it and move quickly, grab it, convince your investors, convince your customers this is what they should be doing, and move forward. There's no right or wrong answers. So just look for such opportunities all around you. We are running over time. Vinod, how much time do you have? Another couple of minutes? Maybe we'll take one question.
Yeah, if there's any question, let's take a couple of minutes and then we can wrap. It's fine.
Okay. So
Sure.
Sandhya,
Thank you.
one last question.
One last question. Okay, fine. So this is like a little aloof from the topic. It's not exactly about pivoting. So I think, what were your major learnings when you were, about to build your inside sales team? So.
Okay. It's like, you've got 2 minutes left in the exam, and then you realize you have a 20-mark question still left, which needs 3 pages to answer. That's why some people start the exam from the last question first, so that they only have multiple choices to answer in the end. Okay, so I do grave injustice to this when I answer this in such a short time. But let me put my thoughts, because I made many mistakes in hiring inside sales teams. So see, let's talk about inside sales teams from India, okay? Because and let's take the extreme example from India selling to the US, okay? If it's India selling into India or Southeast Asia, all of us are in inside sales, right? Nobody's traveling, so that the question is not applicable. But let's assume a steady state where you're sitting in India selling to the US. You're confronted with 2 or 3 problems. The first problem is, they've got to work night shifts. Now, 15, 20 years ago, when the BPO call center wave was on its peak, that was a prestigious job, right? It's not today. So the caliber of people who were in BPOs and contact centers, even now, right? At least 10, 15 years ago, the best, well-spoken, smart people went there, right? You won't get that today. So finding good talent is very important, because in a world where you don't have the comfort of proximity and conversation, it's very hard to build a relationship on inside sales. So you really need to look at your hiring very well. Less is better than more. If you can focus on quality, having 20 really bad inside sales people will do nothing to your metric, right? The second, really, when you hire your inside sales team, is around what infrastructure you're giving them. I'll give you an example. All teams start small, right, with 1 or 2 people. I did the same. Now, let me change the scenario for you. You have 2 inside sales people at midnight in your office, okay? I'm talking post-COVID, right? Or even at home, okay? And their job is to make 70 calls a day to prospects. How motivated will you be in a lonely office or at home in the middle of the night, right, to make 70 calls? My guess is the motivation is going to be zero. Motivation is okay when you have in a high energy flow, right? There's other people doing the same. You have quick breaks, you have team huddles, and everyone's sharing. I did 10 calls, I got 2 answers, right? So you have to understand that it's very, very hard to start small. To start an inside sales team, in a different time zone. in the work from home basis on day one is actually probably a really bad idea, because it's just so hard to motivate them. If you set up an inside sales team in the night, be available for them through the night as the founder. If not, don't set it up, right? So who you hire, understanding the nuances of work from home or working alone, that's super important, right? But if you don't train and arm your inside sales team with the right tools, let's say all of this is okay. What do I mean by tools? The best possible laptop, best possible camera, best possible headset, best possible internet, easy. Okay. What are the tools? Are you giving them something like an outreach to run their sequences, right? Are you giving them right tools to be able to research customers, make the right calls, run their sequences and remind them? Or are you telling them go on an Excel sheet and tell when you made a call? So unless you arm, train, enable your inside sales folks really, really well, you're probably destined failure. So in that I mentioned the word train, but that's a separate pillar. If you don't train the living daylights of your inside sales team, right, you will find more failure than success. And inside sales is harder to monitor unless you have the right tools in place, which do in-call analysis. So you use a gong or a wingman, right? So in-call quality monitoring, sentiment analysis, what's happening, who spoke how much. I did one inside sales call analysis wherein we saw that our inside salesperson spoke 40 minutes on that call. And then the other person spoke 5-10 minutes. So hardly a surprise, the call got over 10 minutes early. So the point is, if you are talking more than you're listening on your first call, you're probably boring the living daylights of the customer. So how do you do that on a mass scale, right? It's very hard to do. So you have to invest in the right tools and technologies to make sure you're monitoring the calls, the analytics around it, and so on and so forth. So all of the above need to be thought through. But before you set up an inside sales team, there are much more fundamental decisions on what's your target market, what are the right kind of people to hire, is inside sales even the right method for you, is it inbound deal fulfillment, sales assistance, or is it cold outbound prospecting? A lot of the decisions you make downstream will change basis the answers to these questions. So that's why I said 20 mark questions. I can't do justice in a few minutes, but happy to talk about it sometime later. Back to you, Ravi.
Great. You actually did answer the 20 mark question quite well. I would give you 18 out of 20. That's fantastic. So I wanted to save the last question for myself so that I can ask you this. So it's one is multiple choice, the other one is a little longer question. So I would say when you were doing what you were doing at Cloud Cherry and you got acquired by Cisco, there was definitely some adjustment, whether you call it a pivot or what, something that I would like you to say. So it's a yes or a no answer that I want you for that part. But more importantly for me, there's also this thought process amongst founders, among entrepreneurs to think that the pivots happen, only in startups. I would assume that there has been a lot of rethinking, re-strategizing within Cisco, your division that you run. And how is that going? I'm not asking for specifics as much as, are you going back to the same fundamental principles that you just talked about, or are there different set of principles you apply when it comes to a large company?
So answer A, yes. Obviously, moving from Cloud Cherry to Cisco, everything changed. The way we work, the scale on which we work. Even though I still run Cloud Cherry, I actually run the entire go-to-market for the contact center business. And I've never seen that many zeros on a deal before. So I'm definitely dealing with a business infinitely larger than our current business. So huge learning curve. The one thing that's a constant was culture. So Cisco has a phenomenally good people-focused culture. So thankfully, that was not, we didn't need to pivot on culture, right? And I remember one of the senior leaders coming and telling my team, hey, don't become like us, help us become like you. And that showed the sort of humility and culture, right, at Cisco. So that I would say this 8 days a week. Culture being consistent, it's different, but it's good, right? Culture being still very, very good was made a lot of the other pivots very easy. But coming to the other question that you asked, our business actually is dramatically changing. So a lot of people might not know, in the contact center business, only 10 to 15% of the contact center install base is actually on the cloud. Many of the other businesses are cloud first, right? So you don't even know the on-prem cloud universe. Whereas the contact center business is going to the cloud fairly belated, not because it's a laggard, because the infrastructure requirement for voice, right, delivering voice at scale, at quality, with no jitter, is incredibly hard. It's not easy, okay? So as the cloud migration app, what we realized was 2 or 3 things. One, every offer we put out as a COVID offer, right? Quick deploy offer, this offer, that all of them have now become permanent offers, right? So whatever we thought were transient for the 3 months during COVID, except the commercial model, right? I mean, if you offered free something during COVID, that obviously won't last in perpetuity. But delivery model, deployment model, everything that we did change. The second thing is, we spoke to a lot of analysts. All the 2023 cloud goals for contact center got advanced by a year. So everything they're supposed in 2023, between 2021 and 22, it's expected to be hit, right? So you can imagine a massive hockey stick in cloud adoption. But the third really is our recognition that the world is not just moving from on-prem to cloud. It's actually leapfrogging a generation. So anyone who's lived in India knows this. While the rest of the world went internet, on the desktop and then came to the mobile, India got its first internet. Like most of us got our first taste of the internet on the phone, right? Which means our consumption model, our savviness, everything is actually some ways better than advanced economy because the innovation came to the mobile first. Mobile first was faster in third world countries, for example, right? Like Kenya with M-Pesa or whatever. So we are seeing that while everyone's focused on moving to the cloud, the future is actually something we call, no time to explain it, the programmatic contact center, which is AI first, API first, highly configurable shell that you can come with the Lego and put together contact center of your dreams. So we are actually changing our operating model from a licensing to a pure SaaS, right? We are changing a technology model from on-prem to not just cloud, but programmatic, right? We are changing everything we know about our billing model, right? So licensing obviously means everything else has changed. How we compensate our salespeople, right? How we incentivize, how we goal set, who we compete against is changing. So this is not a pivot. This I call it's an evolution in a 12-month period. So while your Cambrian broth had hundreds of millions of years to evolve into humans, we have a 12-month period wherein everything around our business is changing. And despite being the size of the business that we have to land up on the other side of the 12 months a completely new business. So I am in the midst of, I wouldn't call it a pivot, I would call it an orbital leap in where we operate. So definitely some exciting times in my end too.
That's phenomenal. Thanks for taking the time. I know that you're in the middle of so much, and now you described it. I think that having gotten this much time from you and this kind of insights for all of us has been phenomenal. So thank you very much for taking the time. And as you can see, all of you in the audience, it's not just small startups. It's also large companies, and it's us as people that are also pivoting. So just take the opportunity to take this in, and we'll definitely be talking more about it as we go along. I think this has now become almost a language that we will do. We are pivoting every day, right? And just make sure that we do the right things for ourselves. So thank you once again, Vinod, and thank you, audience, for joining us. Really appreciate your help and time on today's discussion. Thanks, Vinod.
Ravi, thank you so much, and thanks to the TF team. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Vinod, for your time, and thank you, Ravi. One quick announcement to the audience before we set this off. You will be shown a survey form right after the end of this meeting. So I request you all to fill the survey form which is brought in changing our style and everything and making it more useful for you. So it will be emailed to another day, but you'll see it on screen right after the meeting. So all to fill the feedback form. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.